Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
To 7. A Russian double agent who passed state secrets to MI6 lies critically ill in hospital. Was he poisoned by the Russian state? The situation may be new, the questions are familiar, but what do we actually know? Our correspondent Tom Simons joins us from Salisbury. Tom, the police being very careful about what they say.
Yes, Nick, they're saying nothing at all, really, about the circumstances of this potentially startling incident in the centre of Salisbury. I mean, some really amazing images last night of officers in full protective gear, respirators, searching through bins in the very centre of the city in a shopping area. Across the way, a tent covering a bench where this man, Sergei Skripal, and a 33-year-old woman were sitting when they were taken so suddenly ill. And the key thing the police, I think, said was there was no sign of any external injury, just two people very unwell suddenly on this park bench.
The phrase being used, suspected exposure to an unknown substance, but those officers in their chemical protection suits rather gave the game away.
Yes, I mean, clearly the police have to be very careful in these situations, even if it wasn't something as dangerous as perhaps a radioactive substance or a chemical substance that is extremely dangerous. They have to be very careful. They've also taken the precaution of closing and sealing a pizza restaurant near the scene of the bench and the centre of the shopping centre. I walked past it on the way this morning and it's still closed, a police car outside. And clearly that area is going to be a major focus of their inquiries. And of course we have two previous incidents in history which look similar to this. Firstly, of course, the poisoning of Alexander Litvinenko in 2006 with polonium-210. Secondly, perhaps less well known, but 1978, Georgy Markov, injured with an umbrella injected with poison. He died after 3 days. So clearly that is the potential scenario here, though, as you said, police are saying nothing.
Is there any significance in the fact that officers saying that they have not declared it a counter-terror operation?
I think that is interesting. If police believed that somebody was out there capable of carrying out an attack like this seems to have been, then clearly that is a potential terrorism incident. It's possible that work is going on behind the scenes. Clearly the security services will be very interested in all of this, and Mr. Skripal's background makes him a very interesting person to have been involved in something like this, and of course raises the possibility of what might have happened.
Tom Simons, thank you very much indeed.
A former Russian spy is fighting for his life in a British hospital. We do not know as yet what caused Sergei Skripal to collapse on a bench in Salisbury, but the parallels with what happened to another Russian, Alexander Litvinenko, rang immediate alarm bells. He was poisoned to death in London in 2006. Last year, the website BuzzFeed reported that 14 others have been assassinated on British soil by Russian agents or mafia groups. Heidi Blake is the head of investigations at BuzzFeed, and she's here in the studio. And on the line from Moscow is Andrei Kiashko, who's deputy head of news at the broadcaster RT. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Andrei Kiashko, tell us first how the story is being reported in Russia and how that contrasts with what you're hearing from here.
Well, it doesn't contrast really, because so far it's strictly news. Everyone's quoting the British media, which is pretty much the only ones reporting the name of the suspect, because it's not the suspect, but the man in the hospital. Because as far as I understand, there hasn't been an official confirmation of his identity.
But what do you think of the way it is being reported here?
Here in
the UK, yes.
Well, in the UK, yeah. I've read the British press this morning, and I think that it really eagerly jumped on the opportunity to say that Putin killed a guy, which is pretty hilarious, that bearing in mind it's 2 weeks before the election.
Hang on, when you say the guy, you're referring back to the case of Alexander Litvinenko?
No, I'm talking about the case of Skripal.
Okay, he hasn't died?
Well, I mean, he's in the hospital right now.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you're saying that the British press are jumping on comparisons with Alexander Litvinenko? That is driving the way it's being reported?
Sure, it is. It is. It's very convenient for the tabloids, and indeed not only the tabloids, to run a story which really fits into a narrative that would get a lot of clicks.
Don't the similarities of the early days of Litvinenko and now jump out to you? I mean, particularly their own personal positions, in that both were former Russian agents who then came to live in lived in the UK.
There are a few differences that I would like you to point out. First is that Skripal was pardoned in 2010, by Russia, and he was swapped. So basically, there isn't any desire of Russia to keep him here. And the other detail is that it's still a media report, as well as anything else in this case, because it's the early days. But there is a drug fentanyl involved. I read this of Salisbury Journal. They're saying that they get the reports that a fentanyl, which is a very powerful synthetic opioid, is involved in the case. And I mean, this is a bit of opioid.
Okay, well, we're still waiting for details from the police.
We're still waiting for.
Indeed. Let me turn to Heidi Blake, head of investigations at BuzzFeed, and you did this major investigation last year in which you looked into other deaths that had taken place on British soil. Coming to what conclusion?
That's right. We investigated 14 deaths which we connected to the Russian state or mafia groups that had taken place on British soil since Putin's ascent to power. Those are separate from the death of Alexander Litvinenko, which was one case where the British government did take a firm line and accused the Kremlin of being behind that hit. But our research showed that there were 14 other cases where evidence clearly pointed to Russia. In all those cases, the deaths had been treated as non-suspicious by the British police. But we established that US intelligence agencies had passed the British government intelligence connecting all of those deaths to Russia.
And the kinds of people that you named in that investigation, Boris Berezovsky, now he was found hanged. Some of the others who were part of the 14, there were 2 of them who jumped in front of trains, 2 of them who fell to their deaths. You have evidence that those were suspicious, that there was foul play involved.
That's right. We connected 9 of those individuals to Boris Berezovsky, who was Russia's public enemy number 1. He came to Britain after fleeing Putin's Russia, and all of those people had died in suspicious circumstances after enraging the Kremlin.
So you are suggesting that there is a pattern here?
Yes, there's clearly a pattern here, and we know for sure that the British government has been passed intelligence in all of these cases connecting those deaths to Russia. Our sources in the US intelligence community have expressed anger that the British government hasn't taken any action. In one case, the case of Alexander Perepelichny, it's a case quite similar to that of Sergei Skripal. He was a whistleblower. He came here and gave evidence to the British government and to the Swiss authorities about Russian money laundering. He dropped dead in Surrey with traces of a plant poison in his stomach. The police have said that's not a suspicious death.
Andrei Kiashko, what do you make of what you're hearing?
I think that you are indeed seeing patterns, which, I mean, each of this case, you have the official British police saying that those deaths are not suspicious, and then you're jumping in with something that the US intelligence has fed you and challenging those claims. And you are indeed seeing a pattern which, fits the narrative again. Don't you see that this is very, suspicious?
Heidi Blake?
Well, in the case of Alexander Perepelichny, the evidence speaks for itself. The man has traces of a plant poison in his stomach. He dropped dead in Surrey. The police have said that's a natural death. They've disregarded the evidence of plant poisoning. And we know that the US intelligence community has handed the US Congress and the UK government an intelligence assessment stating with high confidence that Perepelichny was assassinated on the direct orders of Vladimir Putin.
But then why wouldn't the UK go for it? UK is not a big fan of Putin's Russia. Why wouldn't they go for it?
Our information from 17 current and former intelligence sources in both the US and the UK is that the British government has until recently been leery of taking a firm line with the Kremlin. The fallout diplomatically from their response to Alexander Litvinenko's assassination was very painful for the British government. There's an unwillingness to jeopardise the flow of money, Russian money, into British banks and properties, and there's a genuine fear about Russian cyber capabilities. But our information is that there has recently been a step change in response to growing concerns about about Russia's interference in democracies in the West, and that might be why, unusually in this case, the police have made a public statement.
UK is reluctant to be harsh on Russia. I'm sorry, no.
All right.
The UK has been very harsh on RT, for example.
Thank you very much, both of you, Andrei Kiashko and Heidi Blake.
I've been getting away with it.